Good afternoon, readers. It's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf, and today I'm going to be trying to review a fantasy series for you. So this is a review of Millennium's Rule by Trudi Caravan, and I read this series because my husband loves it and he strongly recommended it, but I read it specifically in September for Straya September, which was a read-along hosted by Scott at Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, just encouraging us to read books by Australian authors. And this is just the first prompt. This is the really basic read any book by an Australian author. So I read 4 from the same series. I've been wanting to review this series since I finished reading it, but I had a lot of other things going on in the middle of September and later September, so it just kind of got pushed aside. But because my husband loves this series so much, he has been constantly reminding me that I need to do this review so that he can watch it. So here I am finally. So it's a 4-book series. It was originally designed to be a 3-book series, but I think it's one of the rare examples where an author beefs up a series and makes it a book longer without it being overly self-indulgent and just slightly annoying. The final book really brings the whole thing together and makes it all really work. So I'm really glad that she chose to do that. So the first book is Thief's Magic. That's the one that I've got here. It was published in 2014. I'm not holding up every single different book of the series just because we don't have the dust jackets on all of them. They look pretty much exactly the same, so there's no point. The second book is Angel of Storms, then Successor's Promise, and then finally Maker's Curse came out in 2020. I'm going to try and do this without any major spoilers, but I'd like to talk a little bit about the sort of narrative arc that goes across the series as a whole, and then the things that I liked and didn't like about the series. On the whole, I have to say, I loved this. This was a great choice. I asked my husband for a fantasy series that would take my mind off things, that I could listen to as an audiobook, that would be distracting and very engrossing when I was rushing around the house trying to do batch cooking and various bits of preparations for later September's events. And this was fantastic. It was completely absorbing, and I'll talk a little bit more, I hope, about why it's so good at that. So the first book then, Thief's Magic, is a setup book. It's very good for introducing us to the worlds of the 2 main characters. So we have Tyan, who is a young man who is learning sorcery in a magical school. Sorcery and history is his kind of like niche area. And of course he has a kind of a rough idea of the basics of how magic works. So he's great for introducing the readers to the magic system of this series, which is one of the highlights for me, is how the magic works in this. And then we have Riel, who is a young woman who is learning in a non-magical school, and she knows that she has the ability to perceive magic, called different things in their different worlds, but she has the ability to perceive magic, but it's a huge taboo. She must keep it a secret, and she is not allowed to use it. If she uses it, she will be kind of condemned. So then throughout the book we have this the dramas that they have are around the 2 characters fighting the existing systems in their world. Not necessarily fighting, but working against or getting entrapped by the systems of their world and the established order of things. I would say this book has very much a bit of a coming of age feel. The characters, I would say they're both about kind of maybe late teens. During this book there's a bit of first love, there's a bit of kind of learning, finding yourself, exploration, and there's lots of adventure and drama. In this book, I preferred Tyan's storyline quite a lot because it's just a bit more adventurous. Riel's storyline, because it focuses more on romance, I felt it was a bit more of a kind of like a tropey version of a young woman's fantasy journey. But as the books go on, the character kind of surpasses that, and it becomes a lot deeper and richer, and you kind of need that setup book for her, I think. One caveat that I would put in book 1, something that I didn't particularly like, is, and this happens in a lot of fantasy books, a lot of books generally, that young women who, in order to create a sense of threat for a young woman, the author relies on kind of sexual threat, which I really often don't think is necessary, and I think it can be done in very different ways. I don't think that that should be always the fallback option. It consistently makes me a little bit uncomfortable, but I still did really enjoy this book. Moving on to book 2 then. In book 2, the characters have overcome the immediate restrictions of their world, and it's not a spoiler because it's mentioned in chapter 1 of book 1. There are multiple worlds in this world. There are multiple worlds in this series, and in book 2, both the characters kind of emerge into the wider world, into the kind of the multiverse, and yeah, that's a fantastic kind of like jumping off point. We then find them getting into trouble, bigger trouble. We thought they were in big trouble in the first book when they were fighting against their own magical systems, but now they're fighting against the systems that are at play across the whole multiverse. And in particular, we have a big baddie character, and that big baddie is the Angel of Storms, the title of the book. And it's the classic all-powerful sorcerer thing. Is he evil? Is he good? Is he conflicted? I really like how gives this character depth and complexity from the start. We never just think he's kind of like, or we don't really think that he's purely evil. We can see different sides to him all the way running through the series. Book 3 then, focus is on... I see it gets harder as the time goes on to avoid spoilers, but I would say it's got a main theme of resurrection and sort of reconstruction and rebuilding after conflict, and different opinions on who was right and wrong. And then finally, book 4, the characters have to deal with something completely different. So you can sometimes get this thing where you've got one big baddie and they just keep coming back. And the example that I was going to compare it to is Shadow and Bone. I really enjoyed this series. I think it's much more trivial as a series compared to Millennium's Rule. But it really falls into the trap. Like, the more books you read, the more it's just like the same big baddie keeps kind of cropping up again and again. And again, themes of sort of resurrection and bringing people back. I like that Caravan is able to sort of move past that and find a way for themes that have been introduced from book 1 of the series, in terms of the specific area of mechanical magic, and how different forms of magic can be used in ways that are akin to, I suppose, weapons of mass destruction, the invention of a kind of escalating tools of war, and the kind of the arms race that can happen there. I really liked how she carried that theme through and then was able to make it a bigger part of the final book. The characters are also at that point piecing together more of the history of their worlds and looking for sort of clues and information to understand various aspects of sort of prophecy and legend that have been kind of passed down to them, and where it's been said, if this happens, then this disaster is going to happen. So they have to kind of try and work out whether that's something they can set any store by. What I liked about this book is there's a very big thing for prophecy in the world of fantasy, understandably, because it's cool, like having a chosen one and having a fate foretold. I like that she uses prophecy, but also kind of experiments with the fact that prophecy can be a misinterpretation of historical information, or a prophecy doesn't necessarily have to mean that somebody has sat there and said, I predict that on this day this will happen, and it can be kind of more like hearsay. So I enjoyed that as well. So, things that I really loved about this series then, the magic system, the ways that characters can manipulate magic. So there's a couple of different forms of magic. There is mind reading, so it's really interesting the way that she plays with mind reading, and how different characters with differing power levels have differing abilities to hear the thoughts of people going around them, playing with things like, can people erase or hide memories so that even if their mind is read, their secrets aren't told. Interworld travel is done really, really well in this series. There's a space sort of between the worlds where the magic is completely changed, or there's restrictions or alterations on what can and can't happen in the place between the worlds. And like the path finding and so on between those is really good. I would say that was a real highlight of this book for me, was the way that the multiverse works and is used. It's very effective. When I realised that there was going to be interworld travel in this series, I was a bit like, I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit, because I've read a few books lately where multiverses have been used very ineffectively, and I'm thinking in particular of Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. There are multiple worlds in this book, but they're completely irrelevant to the plot, really. I found it really, really pointless and quite annoying, and I didn't see it as bringing much value. I felt like she could have done something different instead of using the multiple worlds, and the rest of this book I really enjoyed, and the multiple world bit just really bugged me. I think if you're going to have multiple worlds, it should be, I forgot to bring it should be integral to your story, like in The Subtle Life, for instance. The ability to travel between worlds in the whole of his Dark Materials series, that's part of the purpose of what's being written, and that's the same here in Millennium's Rule. This story wouldn't exist without the multiple worlds and the way that those worlds interact. And we have like dead worlds where all of the magic has been robbed. We have worlds where the understanding of magic has progressed to different levels. We have worlds where the certain conditions in those worlds create more powerful sorcerers or less powerful sorcerers, as the case may be. And the using of magic, but also the making of magic, and the use of creativity to make magic. I like the ideas behind that, and the way that characters can use that making ability in different ways. Intersection between magic and religion. So we see in Riel's world, where magic is very poorly understood. It's seen to be as a power that belongs to the angels. That's why if Riel uses magic, she is a thief, because she's stealing the angels' magic, thief's magic. And later on, there are other aspects where the use of powerful magic leads to characters being perceived as godly figures, and how they use that in positive and negative ways, I suppose. There's also a form of magic called pattern shifting, and when a character learns pattern shifting, it enables them to be ageless as well as to heal other people. So I liked how that kind of interplayed with the making, and how the agelessness, as opposed to immortality, agelessness kind of enables immortality, but nobody ageless has ever been really immortal, because something always happens to kind of take that away. I liked how that was used. And I do realise that I'm not being as insightful as I wish that I would be. I'm a little bit tired due to life at the moment. But so I just keep saying I like bits, but it's true, I did like them. I'm going to talk a little bit about things that one more positive was the best magical artefact, one of the best magical artefacts ever, I think, apart from maybe like Aragorn's sword and the Amber Spyglass or whatever, was Vela, and this is a magical book. We love a magical book. So Vela is a sentient book. She has the memories of a human trapped within her pages, and she is made out of that woman. You find this out very, very early on. She has the power to kind of collate knowledge and to remember everything. So she's an incredibly powerful magical artifact. And Tyon in book 1 steals Vela, or ends up in possession of Vela. And that is his thief's magic, that he's ended up with this artifact. And that plays his interactions with Vela at the very start of the first book play a huge role in how his character develops going forward in the series. I really loved the way that Vela was this beautiful mystical piece, but also very relevant to sort of debates that we might have today about things like sentient AI, or like if something doesn't have a body but it does have sort of an intelligence and the ability to sort of formulate opinions and to reason, what rights should they be afforded in that situation. I felt like it was a thought-provoking artifact, but also done in a very fabulously fantastical way. I did feel that a lot of Tyen's motivations come from discussion that he has with Vela very early on, and so he makes a promise to Vela, and he then is motivated by that for quite a long time. I felt that this was one of the weaker points in the story because I didn't feel that it fitted with Tyen's character at later stages, that he was still kind of very attached to this notion from when he was sort of like a teenager and didn't understand the implications of what he was saying. But that was me personally. It did work, but I just felt like it was a little bit weak sometimes. So some of the more negative aspects then, I would say that some of the secondary baddie characters were a little bit underdeveloped. So for instance, there was one character that was one of the baddies that was introduced in the second book, that was Inakera, and I had really high hopes for this character. Like super powerful sorceress that was supporting one of the supporting the Angel of Storms, or the Ruler of Worlds, as he's also called. I really thought that this character was going to come into play quite a lot, but she was kind of dropped, and I felt like it was a waste of the setup of that character. And likewise, we have a really great cast of characters in terms of Tyen, Riel, Carl, Beluka, Dali. If you've read the series, you know who these people are, but if not, we had all of these characters had mixed motivations and a good amount of depth that develops over time and progression, so it really makes sense. We see all of this time passing. We see the progression of them from kind of children or just being introduced to the difficult situations in the world to being able to take on positions of leadership, to being able to command respect, make decisions, be involved in conflict, double-cross people. We see that emerge organically, and then I felt that on the other side there was a lack of development of the other side of the story, I suppose. There is also a love story between two of the main characters that emerges sort of in the second book and lasts until the last book. It makes sense for these two characters to be in love. It makes sense for them to end up together. It's one of those where you have these two characters and the way that they're set up, trying not to say who, but you have these two characters and just logically they're going to end up romantically involved. But I felt that the actual bits of the story that were focusing on them being romantically involved were some of the weakest parts. I believed that they were in love most when they were working together as colleagues and friends. When the author was trying to talk about them kind of like flirting or, having romantic entanglements, I really struggled to believe those scenes. So I found that quite interesting. Like, if she'd have just left it at them colleagues and friends, I would have believed their romance a lot more. Another flaw for me was the audiobook narration. So I listened to this narrated by Grant Cartwright and Hannah Norris, and there's a little bit of an odd decision in the narration that characters from different worlds are given different accents, and this obviously makes sense to help you to try and sort of keep track of who's from where, but there is something a little bit odd about having a character suddenly appear with a really strong Irish accent or a really strong Welsh accent or whatever, and we have our own kind of associations with those accents from the real world, and then having this like really strong Irish accent being tied to a specific nation or a specific world. It was just a little bit odd at times. Oh, another thing that I particularly liked was the traveller community. So there's a group of people called the Travellers who move from world to world, involved in trading. So I really liked the way that they were sort of described and how their culture was portrayed and kind of set up. Writing-wise, I would say that was one of the highlights of the story for me, was the quality of the writing. I think a lot of the time in sci-fi fantasy, writing can take a back step compared to world building and character development, and the writing itself can kind of let things down. I have spent quite a lot of time reading aloud from fantasy stories for my husband, just something that we do together, and I would say in particular, like, I love the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. I think it's fantastic. It's really, really gripping, but the writing sometimes is really awkward and repetitive, particularly when you're reading it aloud. You realise that you're just tripping over words all the time. I didn't notice that with Millennium's Rule. There was in particular one word that she massively overuses is gaze. So it's like every she turned her gaze towards him. He caught her gaze. This happens constantly. Like, there are other ways to describe people looking at each other if you really need to describe people looking at each other that often. But in general, the writing was fairly see-through, fairly good descriptively. I felt like the individual worlds were described really nicely. I really liked that some worlds were set up beautifully and then we returned to those worlds later on. So it wasn't just like a throwaway new world this, new world that. It was kind of like establishing a setting that was then repeatedly used. The only other flaw in the writing is that in the beginning of each book, there's a big time gap between each book, and the beginning of each book when she's kind of getting started again, and there's often a little bit of a lag before the action begins, and particularly in the second book, there's a period where there's a lot of travel from world to world to world, and those worlds were, in contrast to what I just said, those worlds were not very well formulated, and they just felt a little bit sort of superfluous, I suppose. And likewise in the start of the third book, there's a really kind of long self-indulgent description of one of the characters doing pottery and one of the characters making a mosaic, and if their pottery or mosaic making skills came into play again later in the book, more than they do, it would have been worthwhile, but as it was just a little bit of a slow start. So I would say if you're reading the books and you kind of get caught up in a phase like that, just push through it, because the pace does pick up really well. And I think the pacing overall for the series arc as a whole was fantastic. It definitely kept me listening constantly. And I finished this whole series of each one as an audiobook is a hefty chunk of hours, like 20 odd hours. And I finished them within the space of, well, definitely less than a month. So that is my review of Millennium's Rule by Trudi Caravan. I feel like there were more things that I could have said, definitely, but this is long enough already. I am just starting out on Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb, so that's my next huge fantasy series to read as recommended by my husband. But if you have any other thoughts or recommendations for fantasy for both of us, please let me know in the comments. If you've read Millennium's Rule, let me know what you thought of it. If you agree with me about the writing and the magic system and being the particular strengths, if you know how you felt about the characters and how things went, I would love to hear that. Thank you very much for watching, and take care.